The golden age of JRPGs is long gone, though a number of titles in recent years would signal a stalwart return for the genre. It wouldn't be odd, I think, to look for a title that could serve as a parallel to the poster child that is the modern WRPG. That is, The Witcher 3. A title that could not only rival it in gameplay and narrative, but also world design and immersion. While there have been some fantastic big-name titles released this year, namely Persona 5 Royal and the remake to Final Fantasy VII, both games that rival it, if not exceed The Witcher 3 in terms of gameplay, I feel the scope of their worlds by design are too linear for good comparison. Instead, I want to focus on two other titles, those being the recently released definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles and Nier Automata. While the choice for Nier Automata makes clear enough sense, some may wonder why I've decided to go with the original Xenoblade Chronicles over the more recently released 2. After all, the game's 10 years old at this point, released half a decade before The Witcher 3. While 2 is certainly a good game in its own right, it's generally considered an overall step down from its predecessor, with a lower Metacritic score than the original and all its re-releases. Also, I'll be going with the Definitive Edition released this year with all its enhancements. So of course, I'm a bit biased here in that I mostly play JRPGs. I've little to no personal interest in the western side of the genre, especially the ones whose world and lore are based on Tolkien. Witcher 3 when it came out, and honestly only gave it a chance for the sake of this video, in comparison to Nier Automata and Xenoblade, games which I've played to completion and even gone back for seconds. But playing The Witcher 3 now, I have to say I'm glad I'd settle on this video topic, because the writing here is fantastic for the side quests. And honestly, that's not a bad place to start. Writing and narrative are one of the biggest reasons people are drawn to the genre. While I personally find that most other aspects take a backseat to the gameplay for me, I'd be lying if I said an interesting narrative with properly paced storytelling couldn't elevate a good game to great, and on the flip side can be a sour note on an otherwise grand experience. So it's sort of surprising that The Witcher 3, as heralded as it is, playing through the main campaign, I found it to be just okay. I want to initially excuse my near disinterest in the game's main story quest as a side effect of coming into the trilogy at the third game. Of course, I wouldn't be nearly as invested in the narrative coming into it so late, but then I realized something talking to another creative about it. The Witcher 3 was most people's introduction to the series. As of 2019, The Witcher 3 has sold 28 million copies. In 2014, just a year before the third game's release, The Witcher 2 had sold 4 or 5 million. CD Projekt Red likes to combine the sales of 1 and 2 in most reports, so it's hard to get an accurate number. With The Witcher 3 selling about 6 times as many as its predecessors, the majority of people, myself included, having The Witcher 3 as a first experience in the franchise, yet the game's heralded for its writing. Questing in modern RPGs usually goes one of two ways. You either get Majora's Mask or random NPC number 347 needs you to bring them 5 rat tails for their stew tonight. Rarely do they fall in the middle. The writing and side quests for The Witcher 3 are fantastic in that not only are they well written, but are also used as a vehicle for meaningful exploration in its open world setting. Take this one here. It's a quest I took on to find this guy's missing wife. After chatting up some villagers and slapping some wolves around the middle of the woods, the sister runs up on me and asks that I give up the chase. Why, you might ask? Maybe she's her husband or something. I don't know. After politely turning her down, I come across what appears to be the remains of the missing villager's corpse, which then leads me to this abandoned cabin. Now, had I happened upon this lodge while aimlessly exploring the woods, I'd have probably just looted the place and went along my merry way, completely missing out on the werewolf mystery leading me to this underground lair, under the home, and subsequent boss fight. The writing and questing gave urgency and reason to this location, and thus the world at large. The Witcher is full of quests like this, and the fact that they're all voice acted adds yet another layer of depth to them. Admittedly, this is what I spent most of my time on. Not every quest was a banger, but the vast majority of them had me equally invested, despite its so-so main story quest. Like most RPGs, the number of side quests seem to equal, if not straight up outnumber, the main quests in The Witcher 3. Now onto its Japanese contemporaries, which in the case of writing, fare quite well actually, in the exact opposite categories. The main story quests are fantastic, leaps and bounds above anything I experienced with The Witcher 3. Xenoblade's main story quest is particularly interesting as it's a good example of how nothing's truly original. All your standard JRPG tropes are here, so much so that you could practically play JRPG bingo. The attack on your hometown, a chosen hero and legendary weapon, the classic why is all this old stuff so futuristic? Hell, you even fight God at the end. Was that a spoiler? I mean, really? Is it even a JRPG if you don't fight God at the end? What makes the game's narrative stand out is how well it's all executed. Yes, there's an attack on your hometown, but at least there's some wonderful character development. Shulk is a chosen hero, and the Monados is Excalibur, but both of these tropes are wonderfully subverted by the end of the adventure. The writing and side quests, however, are rarely any better than your standard MMO fetch and kill quests, and the ones that do actually have their own story usually end up being just as boring. When I originally played Xenoblade on the Wii, picking up the side quests in the starting area of Colony 9 taught me that questing was painful and boring, and thus I went along the rest of my playthrough ignoring them. Luckily, the Definitive Edition revamps the questing system and its UI, making them extremely easy to track and complete. In fact, the opening hours of Definitive Edition actually taught me the exact opposite lesson from when I played it on the Wii. That quests were very much worth doing because of how easy they were to complete now that objectives were clearly tracked and shown on the map. Unfortunately, they couldn't really fix the boring part. Much like Xenoblade Chronicle, Nier also has a fantastic main story quest, one in which I don't at all hesitate to call the greatest video game narrative of all time, or at least that's my opinion. Not only for the content of said narrative, but in how it uses the nature of the medium to get its themes across to the player. Nier only works as a video game. A Nier movie or novel, funnily enough there is a novelization, wouldn't work in quite the same way. And unlike Xenoblade Chronicles, I am quite sensitive to spoiling this one, so that's all I'm gonna say on that. The game's side quests are of greater quality than Xenoblade Chronicles, but fail to reach the heights of The Witcher 3. While ultimately most missions still boil down to kill and fetch quests, the writing behind most of them are designed to reinforce the game's themes of raison d'etre and the human condition. Most aren't voiced, and the ones that do feature voice acting are quite limited. Now I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't enjoy my time in the Northern Kingdoms, learning the lay of the land and meeting the people that inhabited it and the troubles they faced. It was only when I attempted to combat those troubles, usually in the form of a griffin, ghoul, or some other creature straight out of Tolkien's playbook. It's not that the combat is bad, more so the quality of the game's battle system is drastically lower than the title's other offerings. It's super neat to learn about the history of an abandoned village and the specter that haunts it, but when it comes time to fight said specter, there's a qualitative disconnect that just seems so unusual when you take into consideration how high caliber the presentation and storytelling is, only to be let down by at best middling combat design. This seems to be a reoccurring issue with Western RPGs that seem to lack a feedback loop or any sort of build up to a crescendo in combat. Games like Final Fantasy VII and Persona 5 have limit breaks and all-out attacks respectively, but their Western counterparts overall seem to lack this. Swinging Geralt's sword and blasting enemies with a force push or wave of fire feel okay, and at times the game will take a cinematic angle for a finisher, but that's about the extent of it. In contrast, the Platinum Games developed Nier Automata has fantastic feeling combat, as to be expected from what's arguably the greatest action game studio on the planet. The pod programs also act in a similar role to Geralt's sign spells and crossbow, if not a bit more limited. Nier's combat doesn't just feel better, it's far more visceral once the plot truly kicks in. Cutting down machines and a tons full of Yorha weighs heavily on our android protagonists' minds, as well as the players. Combat also has quite a bit more variety in the hacking minigames and flight module segments, which serve as a good change of pace and moves players out of their comfort zones. Both do have their world-spanning minigames, in which is Gwent card game, while 2B, 9S, and A2 can go fishing in nearly any body of water. Comparing the hack and slash combat of The Witcher 3 to Xenoblade's MMO-esque hotkey tap target battle system is, as much as I hate the phrase, apples and oranges. The fact that combat in Xenoblade is party-based doesn't help either, versus The Witcher 3's single-player character. Xenoblade certainly offers more options with its 7 party members, each with completely different playstyles and multiple builds. While some may find auto-attacks and waiting for cooldowns to be less engaging than the action-oriented encounters in The Witcher 3, you can't help but admire how well the combat is married to the game's narrative. The same visions that drive Shulk and his companion's journey also fuel the battle system's most interesting mechanics and how it recontextualizes the genre's classic enemy cast bars as countdowns. Players will have to think on their toes and to use a large variety of tools at their disposal to change the outcome of a vision that may have foretold the death of a party member or the affliction of a crippling status ailment. Another mechanic, chain attacks, acting as the crescendo to the game's combat I mentioned earlier. As time slows to a crawl and players take control of all 3 party members turn by turn. Some of the hypest battles having long extended chains granted by high affinity, blazing battle tension, and perfectly timed presence of the B button. While it may have been obvious from the jump that The Witcher 3 wouldn't hold up in the combat department, it may also not be fair to compare it to the amazing vistas in Xenoblade or the beautiful decay of Nier Automata. While The Witcher 3 presents a more realistic and less stylized world than its Eastern contemporaries, its realism makes the open world setting too drab to invoke the explorative curiosity that the other games do. Despite their much lower resolution, the art direction in games like Xenoblade and Breath of the Wild provide lustrous environments to get lost in, and exploring for the sake of exploring was always a joy. This is because they dot their worlds with clear points of interest in order to goad players into pushing on to find new surprises just beyond the horizon. The Northern Kingdoms never invoked the same sense of wonder, and their countrysides were a grey backdrop that all blurred together as Roach galloped from point A to point B. I usually only exploit the far villages and question marks in hope of new side quests, which were often narrative delights despite the dull world in which they inhabited. While Nier Automata has a similarly muddy world, the deep purples of the amusement park and lush greens of Pascal's village were just a few of the locations with a big enough tonal shift and color palette to keep the world interesting. Nier Automata also takes another interesting approach to its presentation and how it plays with camera angles and perspective. It's not uncommon to go from a third-person view to top-down, then be pulled into a shoot-'em-up minigame all over the course of a single boss fight. Yoko Taro's eccentric game design seemed to constantly push the boundaries of what I normally expected in an RPG, as I explored his carefully crafted post-apocalyptic world. At the end of the day, The Witcher 3 comes off as the quintessential Western RPG. You play as a single character, fighting dragons and other beasts from Tolkien's Rogues Gallery, all while exploring an open world and all the trappings of a modern RPG developed outside of Japan. While its distant cousins from the Land of the Rising Sun could certainly learn a thing or two when it comes to open-world storytelling, they do, however, take more risks and choose to innovate in ways CD Projekt Red could certainly stand to incorporate whenever they decide to take Geralt for another escapade across the Northern Kingdoms. Shouts out to anyone who made it to the end of this video. It was a long one, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I can't wait to do more content like this. I mostly play Japanese games, but I do have interest in some Western games. Anything that just really piques my interest that isn't your typical standard Tolkien-esque WRPG really is anything I'm interested in. Shouts out to Ryan Johnson, aka the Night Sky Prince, who, I mean this in the most literal sense, this just wouldn't be possible without him in multiple ways. The guy's a huge inspiration, and I just wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing right now without him. Shouts out to Fish Fried Cat. He's got the skits and the gaming videos down, and lots of good content over there. And you can also follow me on Twitter. Hang out with me and the rest of the Ultima crew on the Ultima Facebook page. Like, share, subscribe if you thought the video was enlightening. And can't wait to see you guys again for the next one.